Hi, I'm Lynette Pearson, and this is the Video Voters Guide, a service of the League of Women Voters, a 102-year-old nonpartisan organization that believes democracy depends on informed and active participation. For more election information, please be sure to visit our website, vote411.org, before you mark your ballot. Today we welcome Dr. Kathleen Harder, candidate for U.S. Representative, District 6. Good morning, Kathleen. How are you?
Good morning, Lynette. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. First question, tell us a little about yourself and what are your top 3 issues and how would you propose to solve them?
Well, thanks for that question. I grew up with very little, and it was really seeing the struggles that my mom went through after she took me out of a very toxic environment. My dad unfortunately suffered from mental illness, which he self-treated, which resulted in addiction. She took me literally with 2 suitcases out of that environment, and we left the state to start over. I ran into public school teachers who really changed my life, and to them I owe a huge debt of gratitude. It took me a long time to get through school. I had to work my way through. I went to undergrad for 10 full years before I was able to graduate, and then started medical school when my daughters were 2 and 4 years old, which is not something I would recommend. But made it through, and made it through residency as well. I still had to moonlight just to pay for childcare. But it's those experiences that really color the way I look at the world. It's one of the things that when I talk to patients for the first time, I like to hear their story because it helps me to understand what they're thinking and why. And that's why sharing my story with you and voters is important for people to understand why I believe what I do. The things that really motivate me after being a physician now for 30 years, taking care of people in their most vulnerable times, especially these last couple of years on the front lines of COVID, I really have seen how poorly our healthcare system works for patients, their families, and healthcare workers alike. And a corollary to our poorly functioning healthcare system, especially behavioral health, is our homelessness crisis. So healthcare, homelessness, climate change are really my 3 big motivators to be in this race, to try to make Oregon healthier. It's healthier physically, emotionally, our communities, and our environment.
Fantastic. Second question kind of leads right into that. What leadership role should the federal government take to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as wildfires, flooding that we're all seeing, and severe storms?
Well, unfortunately, we have seen the effects of climate change right here in Oregon very directly, from, as you said, wildfires to storms, the ice storms. We've just seen it all. We've seen people die because they didn't have access to cooling stations. We've seen farmers lose crops because of heat domes, and obviously people have lost property and lives in the fires. Devastating things. But while those things are particularly devastating, what is even more devastating is the lack of action on this most important, really existential threat of our lifetime. So, yeah, I think the federal government absolutely must take lead in this. What's interesting in the most recent international climate report that came out, it was quite disconcerting because we're not on track to get to where we need to be to really mitigate climate change. But one of the things that was quite interesting to me was the fact that industry and business have been starting to move towards green technology and green energy of their own accords, not because government told them to. And that's because the cost of green energy has come down so substantially. So they see the economic benefits of moving in that direction without government telling them to do so. And that's great, but that's not enough. So government has to take the lead on this. I believe that we should act very aggressively and quickly on multiple different fronts. I believe that we need to go with a climate fee and dividend sort of model, and I would certainly support that. It's languishing right now in the House, but I would support that effort. Some of the things that are in Build Back Better that affect climate are very worthy of promoting as well. And some of the relatively low-hanging fruit is to try to work on capturing methane and capping oil wells and pipelines to be sure that there's no methane release. The other thing that's interesting, and aside from talking forests in particular, is here in Oregon, we have a unique opportunity. We've actually had some unique climate legislation just within the last session, the Private Forest Accord, that actually had people who probably haven't talked to each other in almost 20 years get together and work on something collaboratively. That's a glimmer of hope to me. And it really is going to work to protect both the riparian ways near our streams and how they border the forests and other lands. That's the kind of work that's really exciting to me, and it shows that there is willingness now to collaborate. I think everyone believes we do have a climate crisis that we must address. We have to facilitate those conversations, and the federal government needs to take a lead, just as local state governments and local communities need to as well. We also have a unique experience in Oregon because we have all of these forests that some of them are research forests. So we can actually learn how to protect forests and sustain those forests in a healthy manner using data. I'm very, obviously as a scientist, I'm data driven. We need to have more data as to the proper way to manage our forests, and we can do that here in Oregon and hopefully lead the way nationally.
Although each state has the responsibility for running elections, Congress has passed many laws over the years to ensure a citizen's right to vote. In your view, what is the role of Congress to ensure that voting rights remain secure for all?
I am very concerned about the ongoing threats against our right to vote. Voter suppression laws are popping up in many different states and are really disconcerting and is a true threat to our democracy. For example, in Texas, that has some of the most restrictive voting rules and laws on the books, even more restriction is happening with the limiting just one ballot box per county. So imagine a county, Harris County, where Houston lives, having over 4.7 million residents having access to just one drop box. That's obvious voter suppression. So yes, the Congress does have a role in being sure that that doesn't happen. We cannot dilute the 1965 landmark Voting Rights Act. We must strengthen it. And we need to do that at the federal level. I'm hoping there will be legal challenges as well against some of these voter restrictions as they affect Title V of that act. One of the things I'd like to do is take the Oregon model of voting to the national level and allow states to see how very well this model works for us. It ensures people have a right to have access to the ballot. They have plenty of time to vote, and the data show that it's been very secure with no evidence of fraud. So this is something, again, with the data, we can show how well this system works and hopefully increase people's access to the ballot so they can express their constitutional rights.
In closing, why should voters select you for the office?
Well, I've been a practitioner of medicine for 30 years, and I have spent a lot of time taking care of the people in this district. I'm the only one that has lived here, worked here, and raised a son here. I've taken care of thousands of the residents of this district, and I know them. I have done a tremendous amount of outreach to the local communities to find out what's important to them. And that's the kind of work that I believe needs to be done. There are some people running in this race who are known in the Capitol, and that's fine, but I'm known in the community, and I think that's more important. There are also people running in the race who have spent millions of dollars, and all that is done is distracted the voters from what's really the importance of this particular election. Oregon has a chance to elect someone who will represent them and fight for them. I'm very proud of the donors that I have to my campaign. 80% of my donors come from Oregon, and almost 50% come from the Salem area, which is in the heart of the district and where I live. I'm also very proud of the support I have from elected officials, 3 sitting Salem city councilors, the mayor of Salem, the mayor of Independence, the mayor of Sherwood, sitting representative Paul Evans, and just previous representative Brian Clem. All endorse me, and they endorse me for a reason, because they know I will fight for the people in this community and this district, and I will take their concerns and fight tirelessly, as I've done for my patients for the last 30 years. I really believe in servant leadership, that you should have a career or a profession, then go serve come back to your constituents and be able to look them in their eyes, look in your neighbor's eyes, and let them know what you did for them. That's the model that I would like to portray, and I know I will be the best candidate to represent the people of this district, and I look forward to their support.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And voters, don't forget to visit vote411.org before you mark your ballot. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maureen Mader, and this is Video Voters Guide, a service of the League of Women Voters, a 102-year-old nonpartisan organization that believes democracy depends on informed and active participation. For more election information, be sure to visit our online site, vote411.org, before you mark your ballot. Today, we have Teresa Alonso Leone, the candidate for U.S. Representative for District Number 6. Welcome, Teresa.
Hello, Maureen. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted. So tell us about yourself and what your top 3 issues are in running for this office and how you would propose to solve them.
Sure. First of all, I am the daughter of farm workers. I'm a former union member. My family and I came to this country when I was 4 years old. My family and I worked in the fields of Congressional District 6. My parents traveled up and down the I-5 corridor working for different farms, picking berries, different types of fruit and vegetables. Really, beginning of our time in this country was helping feed the people of Oregon. We experienced a lot of hardships as a family of migrant farm workers. And we lived in poverty as a young person. And that meant as the oldest of 5, I had to grow up fast. I learned English really fast to make sure that I could translate and interpret for my parents. They worked sun up to sundown. And so, they were very busy. And I was really thankful that I had teachers who inspired me and challenged me and pushed me and said, Teresa, you're college material and you need to go to college. And, I did. I ended up becoming the first person in my family to get a college degree. I earned my undergrad from Western Oregon University in Monmouth, and then got my master's degree in public administration from Portland State University. With their support, my family support and community support, really, they encouraged me to become a public servant. I served on the city council for 3.5 years before becoming a legislator. And then the community came to me and said, Teresa, we want you to run for state office. And I did. And now they come to me to run for Congress to represent, the new Congressional District, which actually my entire state district is part of. 3 of the areas of interest of mine that I'm running on, that as a congressional leader, I will focus on education, particularly on post-secondary education. There's so many people in our country who have college debt and really are challenged with carrying, thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm one of them. I owe so much money from my undergrad and my master's degree. And there's a lot of people who are not able to purchase homes because they have so much debt. And I want to help fix that in Congress. I also want to pass single payer universal health care and ensure that our folks are getting covered from head to toe. What I mean about that is I want to make sure that folks get mental health support alongside dental and vision and hearing care, along with physical attention. I also want to strengthen our country's economy by raising the federal minimum wage, fix our broken system, and achieve pay equity for women and people of color. Back in 2017, as a freshman, I helped pass the pay equity bill in Oregon. That is something that I'm really proud of and want to be able to help do that, at the national level. So, and I think the other thing that I want to mention is that I've been an extremely strong champion to ensure that our vulnerable populations, such as our immigrant, undocumented, and refugee communities, are seen and heard and are really part of our democracy in a way that is important to them, to make sure that their voices are heard, because they're just as important as everybody else's. Thank you.
Great. Although each state has the responsibility for running elections, Congress has passed many laws over the years to help protect that right, particularly for those who have been disenfranchised in the past. In your view, what is the role of Congress to ensure the voting rights and secure for all? If elected, how much of a priority will this issue be for you?
Thank you for that question, Maureen. This is a very important policy question for me, because we need to make sure that we are protecting the right to vote by passing reform that make it easier for voting. Here in Oregon, we've done an amazing job. We're actually a great example, or a great model for the country, in that we have vote by mail, which it has been proven as safe and secure way to ensure we have the maximum amounts of opportunity for people to vote. We, passed several laws while I have been a legislator. One of them is all of our ballots now are pre-stamped to remove barriers for people being able to mail them in. So, we are really an example. We have motor voter, we have DMV registration to make it easier for people. And so for me, that's a very important subject matter, and something that I want to continue to fight for. Last August, I was one of 100 legislators that went to Washington, D.C. to fight for voter rights. And we stood in solidarity with many of our states who unfortunately are trying to pass voter suppression laws. We know that, many of the people who are most impacted by voter suppression laws are our low income and communities of color. There were some laws that were focused on, only providing voting timeframes when, people were working, which doesn't make sense, or provided voting opportunities in designated areas, which really kept people who have transportation challenges from being able to get there and vote on time. So, it's a very important law and policy that I want to help pass. Thank you for the question.
Great. We just have a couple minutes left here, but over the past 2 decades, women's participation in the labor force has been declining, and rising child care costs are partly to blame. What should be done at the federal level to address these issues, in your opinion?
Yeah, I believe that the federal government must provide legislative solutions to ease the financial burden of child care costs. Here in Oregon, we not only have rising costs in child care, but we have child care deserts. And that poses a challenge, obviously, for our economy, because the people who are most impacted are the women. They end up having to stay home because they can't afford childcare, or there's no childcare in their vicinity that they can go to. So this is definitely something that we must absolutely protect and expand, and create, from a federal government perspective, really fund these opportunities to ensure that we have child care resources and centers all over the state. I helped pass a law in 2021 that actually creates a new department called Early Childhood and Care, which will help Oregon address this issue of making sure we have child care centers around the state, ensure that we have professional development for our providers, and make sure that we have, affordable and accessible child care in Oregon. But this is certainly something that we must address at the national level because it is impacting, a lot of the women who, absolutely deserve to have the same opportunities as everybody else to continue with their careers as well as being moms. Okay. Thank you.
So to wrap it up, we have a minute left. Why don't you wrap it up and tell us why voters should vote for you?
Sure. Well, it's been such an honor to represent District 22 for the last 3 terms. I, have worked extremely hard to pass some of the most, I would say, historical policies like paid family leave. We made sure 100% of our kids have access to affordable and accessible healthcare. I helped pass the driver's license law. And, most recently, as the chair of the education committee, made sure that we are addressing our workforce issues by making sure we have funding sources to help with that, to help mitigate with that. I'm a legislator that not only works within my district, but really I've been working with my colleagues across the state to support our constituents. Bilingual. I'm the first Indigenous immigrant Latina legislator in the history of our state, which really has created, I believe, an inclusive system for folks who historically have not been engaged in democracy, have now become engaged. In my couple first, I would say, opportunities to be in office, people have said that they became citizens so they could vote for me. So I am just, proud to stand before you and continue to serve for the state of Oregon. But I believe that it's now an opportunity for me to run for Congress and represent our state and ensure that the voices of our communities are being heard. Thank you.
All right. Well, Teresa, thank you so much for talking with us today. We appreciate your taking the time. And voters, don't forget to visit vote411.org for all your information about candidate and ballot measures. And thank you again, Teresa.
Thank you so much, Maureen.
Hi, I'm Lynette Pearson, and this is the Video Voters Guide, a service of the League of Women Voters, a 102-year-old nonpartisan organization that believes democracy depends on informed and active participation. For more election information, be sure to visit our website, vote411.org, before you mark your ballot. Today, we welcome Cody Reynolds, candidate for U.S. Representative District 6. Welcome, Cody.
Thank you, Lynette, for having me.
Oh, you bet. First off, just tell us a little bit about your background and what are your top 3 issues?
Sure. My name is Cody Reynolds. I am a Democrat. I'm a veteran. I'm a West Point graduate, and I'm self-funding my campaign because I believe that the only interests that I should be serving are those of the people of Oregon in the 6th Congressional District. The issues that I feel are most important in this election are affordable housing, high-quality affordable health care, and transitioning away from a carbon-based economy with a focus on bringing green industry, green jobs, and green infrastructure to the great people of Oregon.
Well, thank you. That leads directly into our next question. What leadership role should the federal government take to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as wildfires and flooding and severe storms?
So, climate change is a global problem that has local implications. I was speaking with a voter in the district last week, and he was out in his vineyard warming his grapes so that they didn't die, so that his livelihood wouldn't be lost for this growing season. And that extreme weather pattern that last week represented here in Oregon, we all experienced it. I've never experienced anything like that, and I've lived in Oregon 26 years now. That is just one example of the sorts of effects that climate change is having on at the local level here in Oregon. But the United States government is in the position to be the exemplar for the world. We could be the people that the rest of the world looks to and says, the United States gets it. The United States is making an effort to combat the effects of climate change. And we can do that at a federal level by emphasizing the need to develop new green energy technologies, whether they be solar, wind, or hydroelectric. There are a lot of different ways we can approach this problem, but it needs to be well-funded, it needs to be equally distributed, and it needs to be focused on the actual problem, and that is transitioning away from carbon-based fuels towards a green energy economy of the future.
Thank you very much. Next question. Although each state has a responsibility for running elections, Congress has passed many laws over the years to help protect Americans' right to vote. In your view, what is the role of Congress to ensure voting rights are secure for all?
Well, our right to choose our representation is enumerated in the Constitution. I swore an oath to support and defend that Constitution when I enlisted in the Army, and no one relieved me of that duty. It's a sacred duty that I hold close to my heart. I think that laws that cause even one valid legal vote to not be cast are invalid on their face. We need to be evaluating laws that are being passed to ensure that correct votes are not being tossed, not to ensure that illegal votes are cast. And that is how we protect the integrity of the vote, by ensuring that every voter has access to a polling station. Every voter has access to a mail-in ballot if they need it or they want it. To ensure that every voter has access so that they are not disenfranchised due to onerous regulations and rules that are in place, that have been put in place by cynical politicians who seem to think that there is some mass conspiracy to subvert the will of the American people, when they are the only ones who are actually trying to subvert the will of the American people.
Thank you. Over the past 2 decades, women's participation in the workforce has been declining, and rising childcare costs are partly to blame. What should be done at the federal level to address this important issue?
Thank you, Lynette. That's an excellent question. I come from a home where my mom was a single mom. I have 3 sisters, a brother, a stepsister, and we grew up in a household where education was important, but our access to that education was tenuous at best. We need to be doing more to ensure that early childhood education is available to all Americans and all Oregonians. And that starts with fully funding the programs that already exist at the state levels across this country. And that can be done in a lot of different ways. But specifically, we need to be looking at those 3 where the research has shown the greatest impact that early childhood education has is in those 3 to 6 year old ranges, where children learn the valuable skills, the social skills, and the counting and the reading, the things that contribute to a happy and healthy and successful life. We need to ensure that all Americans and all Oregonians have access to that quality early childhood education so that they can achieve the American dream in their lives.
Thank you, Cody. Are you satisfied with the current regulation of campaign spending in federal elections? Why or why not? And if why not, what reforms would you support?
So I have a unique perspective on this because I'm self-funding my campaign. And I'm doing that because I believe that money has a corrosive effect on our political system. There are too many interests that are not aligned with the people of Oregon that are trying to have their say in this election. There is, whether you're aware of it or not, there's a tremendous amount of money being spent for many of my opponents that is unaccounted for, that is coming from people with an interest in affecting this race without actually understanding why. The people of Oregon, I think, are smarter than that. I think the people of Oregon are beginning to recognize that the money that is flowing in from out of state and out of country it's being used cynically. So I am a big supporter of move to amend, specifically with the intention of overturning the Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court. I think that was a terrible piece of legislation. It opened the door to millions and millions, and I mean, at this point, billions of dollars being spent on behalf of of candidates without any real accountability as to who or why it was being spent. And when I'm elected to Congress, I will absolutely move to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. As we know, regulation of firearms remains one of the most polarizing issues in our country today. What steps do you think Congress should take both to reduce gun violence in the U.S. and stop illegal trafficking of guns to other countries?
So I have a unique perspective on this because of my time in the military. I've been trained on weapon systems from rifles, pistols and rifles, all the way up to anti-tank weapons. But the distinction that needs to be made is that I was trained. I have taken courses. I understand how to care, how to care for, and how to use a lot of different weapon systems. And that, I think, is a distinction that needs to be made when it comes to who has what weapon systems and how they're allowed to use them. But we can't really do anything until we address the other aspect of this crisis, and that's the mental health crisis. 22 veterans a day kill themselves in this country. That is unacceptable. And until we have a healthcare system in place to address the needs of those people experiencing crisis who have reached the end of their ropes and see the suicide as their only way out of their current situation, we can't really begin to address the gun violence in this country. 80% of the gun deaths in this country are as a direct result of suicide. And that these are people who are hurting. These are people who need care. They need access to medication. They need access to counseling, and they're not getting it. But I will move to immediately ensure that Oregonians and people in this country have access to that sort of care when I'm elected to Congress.
Thank you so much. Well, in closing, what would you like to tell voters?
Well, I touched on it briefly, but I'm self-funding this campaign because I believe that the people of Oregon deserve a candidate who comes without the strings typically attached to the more traditional or establishment type candidates. My opponents have had millions of dollars spent on their behalf. I have spent only my money with the support of a few proud Oregonians, and I can't tell you how happy I am to have received their support, but I never asked for it. But it means the world to me to know that people are behind me in supporting me. I'm not interested in representing the donor class, or I should say, I'm not interested in only representing the donor class of this country. When I'm in Washington, D.C., I'll represent everybody. And those are those people, those unsung people, those people who feel like their voices don't matter. They matter to me, and I'll represent them when I'm in Washington, D.C.
Cody, thank you so much for talking with us today. And voters, don't forget to visit our website, vote411.org. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Terry Steiner, and this is Video Voters Guide, a service of the League of Women Voters, a 102-year-old nonpartisan organization that believes democracy depends on informed and active participation. For more election information, be sure to visit our online site, vote411.org, before you mark your ballot. Today we have Andrea Salinas, candidate for U.S. Representative District number 6. Welcome, Andrea. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your top 3 issues in running for this office, and how would you propose to solve them?
Thank you, and thank you for that question. So my top 3 issues really fall into the categories of economic stability for families, healthcare, and the environment. And for economic stability for families, I really believe that there are federal policies in place right now that do not enable families to fulfill their potential and really to have a fair playing field. So things like increasing the minimum wage. Right now, the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and it's no wonder that families are really struggling to make ends meet and make sure that they can keep a roof over their heads. So obviously, an increase in the minimum wage is something that I would push for. I think along with that goes healthcare and stability and access to healthcare. I've been chair of the House Healthcare Committee. I currently serve as vice chair of the House Healthcare Committee. In Oregon, I think we've been really pushing to increase access to care, including reproductive care, which really is at risk right now in the Supreme Court with Roe v. Wade and the balance. And so for me, it is something that I've been passionate about for a number of years. I led on the nation's most comprehensive reproductive rights policy in the nation, providing for the full spectrum of reproductive care, everything from prenatal care to postpartum care, including that Oregon has access to abortion coverage as well. And then I would finally say the environment. It's an issue that I have been working on for a number of years here in the state. It's something I've been passionate about. I think Oregon is doing its job to lower its carbon footprint, but this is something that we need to take on really comprehensively. It's an existential question for not only Americans and U.S. citizens, but globally we need to address it. But certainly the U.S. needs to be leading in this space. You know, I was instrumental in passing our first clean fuels program to lower the carbon intensity of our automobile fuels. I've been instrumental in trying to push for better, more sustainable forest practices and for forest and agriculture to do its part in terms of sequestering carbon and giving some of our industries, our natural resource industries, the tools and the incentives to have better practices as well. So all of these things are the three things that I would really want to champion at the federal level.
Thank you. Talking a little bit about the economy and families, over the past 2 decades, women's participation in the labor force has been declining, and rising child care costs are partly to blame. What should be done at the federal level to address these challenges?
I think there are a number of things that can be done. First, I think we can pay our workforce better. I think we saw a lot of people leave the childcare workforce, which is why I think we have such a shortage right now. And, you know, employment-related daycare is something that I've been working on as a number of years, first as an advocate with AFSCME, Oregon AFSCME here in Oregon, to make sure that our care providers are making a living wage. And that's something that the federal government is instrumental in terms of the reimbursement rate for a lot of our daycare providers. I also think that we need to be making sure that families can afford that daycare. So for families who can't afford it, you know, providing an increase in the child care tax credit, I think is really helpful to, again, spur the economy so that folks can get back to work and that they have a safe place for their children to be cared for during the day when they are at work. So I think those are 2 really big things that the federal government could be working on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Shifting gears a bit to talk a little bit about public schools and the aftermath of the pandemic, et cetera. Many public schools are struggling with the mental health issues of both students and staff and teachers, as well as plummeting academic achievement. What can the federal government do to help in these school districts?
Oh, I think this is a big place where the federal government can actually step in. So, you know, Oregon took a big step just a couple of years back with the Student Success Act and looked directly at the link between academic achievement and mental and behavioral health needs of our students. And so we made the largest investment we've ever made in education. I was so proud to be a part of this historic bill. And really, we put in there a bucket and grant formula and it's not a formula, but a grant process for school districts to be able to access funds to serve our students with, again, social workers who have not been in the school districts for a long time, psychologists, and really better mental health care, because there is a direct link. There's a direct link with homelessness as well for academic achievement and students' ability to be able to excel in school. So the federal government definitely needs to step up in this area and be able to, one, attract the workforce, again, because we're seeing teachers leave in droves right now. So we need to be able to give teachers a better and bigger voice in the classroom and kind of as we come back and we start to rebuild. And then we also need to be able to pay them in a way that is commensurate with the actual work that they're doing, because they're no longer just teachers. They are, as you mentioned, you brought the link in with behavioral health and mental health issues with our kids. There are so many other, what I could consider social determinants of health in order for a child to succeed in academics and their education. And I think teachers are taking the brunt of that right now. And so we need to be able to better support them, and no better place than the federal government to start that work.
Thank you. You talked earlier about the environment. What leadership role should the federal government take to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as wildfires, flooding, heat domes, drought? What should the federal government's role be?
This is a big one where I think it requires federal investment. We need to move to a clean energy economy that really takes the lens of climate in our aspects, all aspects of our economy. And, either how are we contributing to increasing climate change, or how are we contributing to decrease it, right? What are the mitigation steps that companies and businesses are taking? And I think it's going to be incumbent on the federal government to make the investments in the new infrastructure, because we do need to kind of turn the corner and make sure that clean energy economy is in place. So infrastructure in terms of electric vehicle infrastructure. This is going to be a new highway transportation system across the United States. The federal government has a huge role to play in that infrastructure and what that looks like. States can't be relied upon to do it themselves. We need to make sure that the technologies are in place for all of the renewable energy that's going to be needed if we expect to decrease fossil fuel reliance. And again, that's where the federal government, I think, comes in. Oregon has a great source of offshore wind. I worked on a project a few years back trying to bring a couple of offshore wind projects to our southern coast off of Coos Bay. We needed a power purchase agreement, and we needed the state to step in with a little bit of extra funding to make that happen. And we couldn't get it through, but those are the types of investments that the federal government can make, and they can do it nationwide. So I think those are the types of things that, the federal government is very capable of doing. And it not only will help us get to achieving our greenhouse gas emission goals, but it'll also create jobs, and really good paying jobs. And so making sure that we have the apprenticeship programs in place to train our new workforce, and making sure that those who are displaced by this new economy are also cared for.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have about a minute left. Why should voters vote for you?
Oh, thank you for that question. So I have been working on issues that I think are important to all Oregonians, but certainly folks in the Congressional 6th District. I've been working with farm workers to make sure that they were included in the minimum wage bill back in 2016. More recently, I was a champion on a bill to make sure that our farm workers have access to overtime pay after 40 hours a week. I've been working with these communities on healthcare issues to bring down the cost of healthcare, to make sure that prescription drugs are more affordable. We now have some of the most transparent drug pricing laws in the nation. I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing, increasing access so that all Oregonians have access to affordable health care. These are things that I want to take to the federal level. We passed an incredible paid family medical leave program here in Oregon that's still pending at the federal level. I know how to get things done. I don't just hold values that are important to Oregonians. I actually deliver, and I've delivered on really progressive family values. And so I'm excited to take the work and the experience that I have here in Oregon to the federal level. But I know I can't do it alone. I need the support of the League of Women Voters and those who are viewing you. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your taking time to talk with us today. We're going to wrap this up. Voters, don't forget to visit Vote 411 for complete candidate and ballot measure information. And thank you again. Hi, I'm Teresa Steiner, and this is Video Voters Guide, a service of the League of Women Voters, a 102-year-old nonpartisan organization that believes democracy depends on informed and active participation. For more election information, be sure to visit our online site, vote411.org, before you mark your ballot. Today we have Loretta Smith, candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, District Number 6. Good morning, Loretta. Welcome.
Good morning.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your top 3 issues in running for this office, and how would you propose to solve them?
Oh, wow. There are a couple issues. Thank you so much, Terry, for inviting me this morning to talk about some of the issues that I think are common sense types of issues. I think that creating good paying jobs to strengthen our local economy is one of my big issues. Guaranteeing quality health care, make Medicare available to everyone, and reduce costs so that universal health care is a right, not just a privilege of the fortunate few. And the other big issue is we need to protect our environment. And we need to preserve many of Oregon's vibrant natural resources and ecosystems. And I think if we do that, we'll be able to help families get ahead, make living more affordable for Oregonians, and reduce the prices for goods and services. And we most definitely have to expand affordable housing and meet people where their income levels are at.
In the aftermath of the pandemic, many public schools are struggling with teacher and student mental health issues, as well as plummeting academic achievement. What can the federal government do to help these school districts?
I think the federal government is onto something. They're giving states additional resources to deal with mental health issues in the schools from K through 12. And I think they need to continue to follow those students with this huge learning loss that has happened over this past 2 years. There are a lot of parents who were left behind, and their kids were left behind because they didn't have the proper equipment. They were not online. And, quite frankly, they were not prepared to be able to teach their children during the pandemic. And so it was so hard for many who didn't have access to the internet. And when the school systems caught up with it, and then they were giving hardware, then they had to deal with the issue around internet access. So I think they need to continue and identify those kids who are testing below the academic criterion for their age group, give them additional resources so that they can try to catch up, not just during the summer, but during the school year.
All right, thank you. What role does Congress have in the assimilation of refugees that the U.S. accepts?
Well, we have a huge role because the Congress has to vote on how many refugees comes from each country. We have to make sure that people are safe. We have to also make sure that our laws of the land are being followed. There are a lot of folks who are at the borders right now who are experiencing a lot of health and safety issues, and they're not allowed to come in. But I also want to, make something very clear, because if you listen to the news, you would think that all of our refugees or folks who were undocumented were coming from Mexico. That's not true. We have a lot of folks who come here on their passports and they just never return. They're from Europe and other places and they never return. But I think we have to manage the amount of folks who are coming in. And if we're letting folks in as refugees, we have to be able to give them those wraparound services once they arrive in the United States so that they can enter in a way that is meaningful and effective to their entire family.
Okay, thank you. What leadership role, talking about the environment now, what leadership role should the federal government take to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as wildfires, flooding, heat domes, drought, and more severe storms?
Well, a couple of things should happen. I think that the entire committee, the couple of committees that deal with the wildfires and the environment, they need to take a trip out to the Pacific Northwest. Climate change is real, and it's not going to be, Terry, it's not going to be just one single, silver bullet that's going to take care of everything. We have to reduce our carbon footprint. And in Oregon, about half of our land is federal forest land. when I think about the fire, they called it the bootleg fire last year. That bootleg fire was so hot that it was a tornado storm of fire inside, that they could not really fight it. So it has gotten progressively worse every year for the last 3 to 5 years. And we have to figure out, how do we make sure that we have water? How do we take care of those folks who are in Southern Oregon and other places who are farm workers, and make sure that we take care of them and their families, because they don't have, guaranteed sick leave. And so I think they need to take a trip, assess it, and really get down on the ground with the Forest Service. Now, managing our forests is not my my expertise, but what I do know, just from listening to some of the experts, that it would be really helpful if members of Congress would actually come out to the Pacific Northwest, understand what they're talking about, instead of, legislating and creating policies and, sending resources to problems that they've never seen.
So you would advocate a field trip?
Yes, ma'am. Definitely have a field trip.
All right.
And then they can understand what some of these folks who are in these rural small communities, who are in Yamhill and Polk, what they're really experiencing. You don't get a full understanding until you're down on the ground.
Right. Although each state has responsibility for running elections, Congress has passed many laws over the years to help protect Americans' rights to vote and make it easier for citizens to exercise that right, particularly for those who've been disenfranchised. In your view, what is the role of Congress to ensure that voting rights are secure for all?
Well, the only way that Congress is going to be able to secure that is that we need to pass the Freedom to Vote Act / the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. They've gone to several different Voting Rights Act, but whatever the latest one is, we need to pull those together, make sure that, folks in states that have put voter suppression laws on the books, that they're not able to do that. So we have states right now who have many voter suppression laws on the books, and they're acting as if the 10th Amendment is the final rule. So the 10th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, they're constantly fighting with one another. The 14th Amendment is making sure that individuals have equal protection under the law. So when you put these voter suppression laws in, and you don't have a larger Freedom to Vote Act on the federal level to stop them from doing that, they actually take away the freedom of individuals. And so as the 10th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, as they're fighting about this, we could settle this whole issue around what is the law that supersedes anything that states do. Our democracy is at stake right now. That's another reason why I'm running. We have people in the Congress who believe that, January 6th did not happen. And at the same time, they are also creating these laws that are making it really hard for people of color, low-income folks, not to have their constitutional rights looked at. And I think the most simple thing that we could do right now, we have to take our attention off of two people who are on the Democratic Senate side, Manchin and Sinema. They're not the end all to beat all of us passing this legislation. We have 50 other Republican senators who are basically, thumbing their nose up at people who are experiencing old Jim Crow kinds of laws. And they're basically saying, we don't care. But we have a responsibility right now. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave everybody the right to vote. And if we don't enact this, because the Supreme Court messed around with that Shelby case And so now those states in the South who had historically suppressed the vote, they don't have to get permission from the justice system before they change the rules. And since they don't have to have that anymore, they have just gotten out of control, and people believe that they can suppress voters' right to vote. I mean, how ridiculous is it to say that you can't bring people food and water when they've been standing in line to vote for, hours? That you can't that you can't vote ahead of time. Same day registration. That they're removing ballot boxes from different areas that serve Black and brown folks. Those things are ridiculous to me.
This is clearly a passion, and I understand what you're saying.
It is.
We've run out of time. And I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for talking with me. It's been an interesting conversation. Voters,
thank you so much.
Please don't forget to visit vote411.org for complete candidate and ballot information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Hirsch, and this is Video Voters Guide, a service of the League of Women Voters, a 102-year-old nonpartisan organization that believes democracy depends on informed and active participation. For more election information, be sure to visit our online site, vote411.org, before you mark your ballot. Today we have Matt West, candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, District 6. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Hi. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Kathleen. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your top 3 priorities are for Congress.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Matt West. I'm a candidate for Oregon CD6 because I believe that we need to take on the climate change ASAP. We've kicked the can down the road for too long. I have my PhD in studying renewable energy, and I know how we need to go about solving this issue. We need to pass the Green New Deal. We need to pass Build Back Better, and we need to institute our carbon tax. Next up on my list is that we need to reduce income inequality. My tagline is that we need to tax the rich and save the planet, and I believe that taxing the rich to help fund various workers' programs such as the PRO Act, to get that passed, help to support unions, help to also increase help to increase the power of workers in office. Last but not least would be single-payer Medicare for all. I believe that we need to have universal health care in this country that should be free at the point of service, and I believe that will also tie into helping workers in this nation.
Thank you. Over the past 2 decades, women's participation in the labor force has been declining, and rising child care costs are partly to blame. What can be done at the federal level to address these issues?
We absolutely need to address this issue. We need to have dignity in childcare in our nation. Right now, we have a dwindling amount of people who are providing childcare, and because of that, costs are skyrocketing. In such, it becomes now cost effective for many women to leave the workforce in order to help provide childcare support because work doesn't pay enough. So we need to ensure that we have universal childcare in this nation, that we work towards creating a system where it actually pays to work.
Are you satisfied with the current regulation of campaign spending in federal elections? Why or why not? And if not, what reforms would you support?
Absolutely not. I believe that this election right now in CD6 is a referendum on our democracy, whether or not we are willing to let a billionaire buy this district outright to install their personal friend. I believe we desperately need public financing, and I would work towards promoting the For the People Act to ensure that we do have more public financing of our elections. I believe what really matters is the number of supporters a person has, not the size of their wallets.
What leadership role should the federal government take to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as wildfires, flooding, heat domes, drought, and more severe storms? Please explain your answer.
This is why I'm running. I have my PhD researching renewable energy technologies, and I spent my academic career working to fight climate change. I believe this is an existential threat that we need to address, and we need to address it now. We've kicked the can down the road for far too long, and we're feeling it now. We used to have snow on the top of the mountains all the way through summer. Right now, we don't. We now have a wildfire season, which is horrible. I had long COVID at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had to wear a gas mask just to walk my dog. Otherwise, breathing was way too painful. We need to pass a Green New Deal. We need to pass the environmental parts of the Build Back Better bill, and we need to pass a carbon tax. Lastly, we need people in office who understand the science, because that's the only way we're going to get effective regulation in solving this problem.
Although each state has the responsibility for running elections, Congress has passed many laws over the years to help protect Americans' right to vote and make it easier for citizens to exercise that right, particularly for those who have been disenfranchised in the past. In your view, what is the role of Congress to ensure that voting rights are secure for all? If elected, how much of a priority will this issue be for you?
This is absolutely going to be one of my main priorities, even if I didn't list it in my top 3 earlier. I am a strong supporter of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I believe it's currently horrendous how much we're able to disenfranchise people across this country. In Harris County in Texas, for example, there was only one ballot box for the entire county during the 2020 election, and they specifically put it far away from the city center of Houston to, in effect, disenfranchise the people who lived in that more blue city. We need to pass a constitutional amendment to secure the right to vote for all Americans, all citizens, regardless of anything. It should be an inalienable right, and we need to make sure that we are not only enforcing the election laws that we have on the books, but strengthening them. So it's not just that you have the right to vote, but also the ability.
The regulation of firearms remains one of the most polarizing issues in our country today. U.S. gun deaths totaled more than 38,000 per year, and Mexico recently filed suit against U.S. gun manufacturers, claiming that 70% of guns trafficked to Mexico come from the U.S. and are linked to the 17,000 homicides occurring there each year. What steps do you think Congress should take both to reduce gun violence in the U.S. and to stop the illegal trafficking of guns to other countries?
I actually very recently read an article that said that gun deaths were the #1 cause of death for children in the United States in 2020. I find that a horrible fact. Guns kill people, full stop. We need to pass regulations that will help to protect people and help to regulate the omnipresence of guns in our society. The Second Amendment says that we need for well-regulated militias. So I think we should pass some regulations. It should not be easier to get a gun than it should be to be able to get a driver's license in this country. But in many states, that's currently where we are.
In the aftermath of the pandemic, many public schools are struggling with teacher and student mental health issues, as well as plummeting academic achievement. What can the federal government do to help these school districts?
We absolutely need to make sure that we're providing support for teachers and students, both with public school nurse, but also public school mental health professionals. My mom was a public school nurse, and so I know firsthand at how many different baskets she had to juggle every given day, and the critical nature of the work that she helped to provide. I think we need to double Title I and Title II funding to make sure that teachers have the resources they need to do their job well and do their jobs with dignity.
Okay, here's your closing statement. Why should voters vote for you?
Like I said at the very beginning, this election is a referendum on our democracy. I am not a political insider. I'm a professional. I am a progressive scientist. What Bernie Sanders showed in the 2016 election is that the people of this district want more from their representatives than what they're currently getting. I believe that I am going to be the best person to help to advocate for those values. I have no intention of sitting on my hands on pushing our government to take the threat seriously. I will not stop fighting until America is carbon neutral, until workers' rights are respected, and until billionaires and corporations are held accountable in this country.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And voters, don't forget to visit vote411.org for complete candidate information. And as those ballots arrive in your mailbox, be sure to fill them out and return them.